Yes, a long time. Nearly 60 years. A very long period. Remember that moment at Paramount Pictures, when you were first meeting Bob Redford, and you were strolling down the hallway with him in front of the secretaries? Well, we strolled through the administration building's corridor. Most likely you don't recall. No. And the secretaries were fantastic. Robert Redford has finally spoken it aloud after a lifetime of keeping quiet. The Hollywood icon revealed the truth he had concealed for decades. At the age of 88, he was in love with her. But why now, and who was she? What finally got him to say something? The entire story, from their modest beginnings to the heartache and the stirring words Redford spoke in his latter years, is told in this video. This isn't another romance between celebrities. From a man who had everything but her, this is a unique look at love, remorse, and loss. Stay with us through to the very finish. At 88, the admission rocked Hollywood. In a rare private conversation, Robert Redford, now 88, paused, reflected on a life full of accolades, celebrity, and iconic roles, and said something nobody had anticipated. My life's love was Lola. This admission felt like a huge change for a man whose reputation was based on charm, mystery, and unwavering quiet. The journalists and fans were taken aback. Redford had never discussed his personal life with others. He let his art do the talking and kept love under wraps. Why now then? Why bring up Lola Van Wagen, whom he wed more than 60 years ago, and split from in 1985? The answer was in his tone. He had no intention of making news. He spoke from the bottom of his heart. I never really moved on, he said in a steady but gentle voice. Memory wasn't the only factor here. It has to do with recognition. Lola wasn't only a part of his narrative. The foundation was her. His name was known to the woman who supported him before anyone else did, prior to the Oscars, film festivals, and celebrity. And now, at last, Robert Redford was paying tribute to her role in his life after decades of silence. His words struck a deep chord because they were genuine. She saw something in me when I was just trying to survive. His voice broke. Just the facts, no drama. You saw it in that instant. Gratitude, love, and remorse combined into one. Redford wasn't seeking attention at the age of 88. Even if it didn't last forever, he was at last admitting to a love that shaped him. And the world heard him speak it out for the first time. She was more than just my spouse. She served as my compass. She's unlike anyone I've ever met. But in order to comprehend the significance of this revelation, you must travel back in time, not to Hollywood or the red carpets, but to a flickering black and white television set, when a 20-something guy first saw a woman he had never met and knew she was the one. When he first saw her on television, Robert Redford was a young guy looking for meaning before he became a superstar, before the fame and movie sets. He saw her one evening in the late 1950s while watching a straightforward, informal television show. She was a woman he had never seen before. She was brilliant, radiant, and poised. It dawned on him then that she was Lola Van Wagenen. That's all, he muttered. I'm going with whatever she is. There was nothing dramatic about this Hollywood meet cute. This woman, this stranger on screen, was someone worth pursuing, and it was instinct, a silent certainty. Redford had little money. He was not well known. He had something more powerful, though, instinctive conviction. He took action as a result. He managed to get to meet her, and it all made sense when he did. Their initial exchange was unimpressive. It was profound, inquisitive, and honest. They discussed the world they wished to see, books, and the outdoors. Both charm and ambition failed to captivate Lola. She appreciated Robert's uniqueness, curiosity, seriousness, and thoughtfulness. She also had dreams of her own. She wasn't just another attractive TV personality. She was a young lady who was enthusiastic about education and environmental preservation. Redford recognized something in her from their first meeting that he had not discovered elsewhere: substance. I respected her strength and, as he would later describe, her brains. Their relationship quickly evolved after that. Not on celebrity or fantasy, but on a common goal. Two young people who are willing to work things out together, but are still figuring life out. Coffee dates, lengthy conversations, and the start of something they both felt, but didn't fully understand at the time, were all results of that initial glimpse across the screen. She exuded a silent power. It drew me in. What started off as a spark quickly evolved into something more. They did more than simply fall in love. They had late-night conversations and dreamed together. They made the decision to start a life. They would do it in the Utah Highlands, far from the bustle of the spotlight, where their narrative really started, rather than in New York or Los Angeles, Origins of the University of Utah. Celebrity relationships were uncommon at the University of Utah in the late 1950s. However, it formed the backdrop for a subdued yet potent love tale between Robert Redford and Lola Van Wagen. Both of them were young, aspirational, and curious students. Lola was interested in history, activism, and the world outside of their college, whereas Redford studied painting and was still trying to find his voice. Their shared appreciation of study and the natural world strengthened their bond. They weren't following parties or trends. Rather, they would stroll across the hills and discuss politics, the environment, and their ideal future. Redford once declared that she had more in mind than simply becoming a wife. She desired to change things, and he was motivated by that. He became grounded as a result. Lola provided a sense of peace that a restless man didn't realize he needed. They talked about movies, novels, and their disappointments with the world over long evenings. Robert and Lola felt like partners, pushing and challenging one another, and acquaintances who knew them at the time stated they were always in their own world, while others around them were dating casually, nor ostentatious nor boisterous, just profoundly bonded. Redford recalled that we didn't need much, only each other and time. They formally declared it in 1958. Lola and Robert were married. The wedding was not a lavish affair. There was only love and the hope that they could create something genuine. There were no cameras or gossip columns. After moving in together, they began a life that was uncertain at the time. Robert Redford's future self was unknown. However, Lola was the one person who had entire faith in him. Her trust carried me, and she was my first audience. However, their peaceful existence in Utah was about to change. Robert's aspirations extended well beyond the school. And it wasn't a gentle call when the spotlight arrived. Everything would be put to the test by fame. Their future, their love, and their patience. What began in canyons and classrooms was bound for Hollywood. A rising celebrity, dreams, and marriage. In 1958, Lola and Robert were more than just newlyweds. They were real companions. They were impoverished. Despite their lack of celebrity, they had faith in one another. Lola worked, supported, and encouraged Robert at every turn, while he pursued minor acting jobs in New York. He had more than a wife in her. In a world full of chaos, he possessed a steady hand. They didn't have a dazzling beginning. Robert was frequently unemployed, playing whatever parts he could get on stage, in little TV roles, or none at all. Lola was the one who kept them grounded, and never grumbled about the instability. Redford would later acknowledge that she sacrificed for me to pursue my goal. She kept an eye on the wider picture, even when they were having financial difficulties. Lola was doing more than simply keeping him alive. His vision was being shaped by her. Her enthusiasm for the environment, human rights, and history forced him to consider his career goals carefully. She didn't want him to pursue meaningless celebrity. She wanted him to share stories that had meaning. And gradually, his craft started to reflect those ideals. Shortly after, Robert began to get jobs that pushed him to grow as a thinker as much as an actor. By the early 1960s, Redford's reputation began to gain traction. Lola was there at every stage as TV gigs evolved into movie tryouts, taking care of their children, supporting them, and watching from the sidelines. The groundwork had been established, but fame had not yet arrived. One composed of faith, sacrifice, and silent power. The base I stood on was constructed by her. Back then, I didn't always see it, but now I do. But it's not easy to get famous. It slams in. The life they had created together in Utah's shadows was gradually drawn into the spotlight as Redford's star rose. Even with its brightness, the spotlight would start to cast sweeping shadows across their once private relationship. The invisible burden of fame. The big break for Robert Redford came quickly and with a bang. He rose to prominence in Hollywood with roles in Barefoot, In the Park, and Butch Cassidy, and The Sundance Kid. He was suddenly more than just a performer, he was a symbol. However, his marriage suffered first as a result of the high price he paid for his celebrity. He once remarked, "When the world is tugging at you, it's hard to hold on to anything real." This new phase wasn't exciting for Lola. It was intrusive. Camera flashes, lengthy filming schedules, and reporters asking questions no one had the right to answer had taken over their previously peaceful existence. Private by nature, Redford started to distance himself. In an attempt to make sense of a world that was now watching him all the time, he immersed himself further into his work. Lola stayed at home to raise their kids and maintain some semblance of normalcy in the meantime. Robert was frequently preoccupied, even when he was at home. His thoughts were consumed by directors, screenplays, and the pressures of fame. Strong as ever, Lola never voiced any complaints. However, the distance between them grew. We were living in different worlds, Redford acknowledged. They tried going on family vacations, keeping their private lives out of the tabloids, and finding time for one another when they could. One was built on sound stages and interviews, the other on school lunches and quiet sacrifices. And gradually that difference became harder to ignore. I was pursuing success and losing my center in the process. But even in the midst of that chaos, life brought something even more difficult than fame. For Lola, the loss was about connection, not just time. And for Robert, the guilt of that began to subtly grow. As a result, the strain remained between them, unsaid but always present. 1 year after their wedding, in 1959, Robert and Lola experienced an unthinkable tragedy: the death of their infant son, Scott, who was only 2.5 months old. It was a heartbreak for which no couple is ever ready. The loss would test not only their marriage, but also their ability to endure the pain together. It's the kind of loss that changes everything, and for Robert and Lola it left a scar so deep that even time couldn't mend it. Robert was a young actor at the time, not yet well known, and Lola was a grieving mother, barely in her 20s. The pain was unbearable, but they supported one another not with dramatic speeches, but with presence. Redford once remarked, "We didn't talk much, but we stayed close. We had to." They found solace in that silence, and their already strong bond grew stronger under the weight of grief. Redford's emotional life and work would be shaped by that loss, and many years later he directed Ordinary People, a film about a family dealing with the death of a son. Even though they would go on to have more children, Scott's death never truly left them. It lingered in missed birthdays, buried memories, and every quiet moment that reminded them of what they had lost. The story was too personal, the raw performances, the quiet moments of pain. It was all drawn from something real, something personal, and it came from a place I knew too well, he admitted. Lola also knew it, having lived it. But if that tragedy did anything, it reminded them of why they needed each other, not in a loud, dramatic way, but in the kind of way that just staying together was an act of love. That pain never leaves you, but she helped me carry it. Out of heartbreak, they built resilience. Out of silence, they found meaning. And as Robert's career began to soar beyond imagination, he never forgot who stood beside him when he was just a struggling actor, and then again when he was a grieving father. Behind every powerful man, there is usually a woman whose influence subtly shapes history. For Robert Redford, that woman was Lola Van Wagenen. As his career took off, she wasn't just observing from the sidelines, she was mentoring him. As Redford stood in front of cameras, Lola molded the values that enabled him to decide which stories were worthy of being told. He once remarked, "Redford had become a major star in the 1970s. She reminded me why stories matter." He could have played any part, but he began to make decisions that spoke to something more profound. Movies like Ordinary People, All the President's Men, and The Candidate weren't merely box office successes. They were analyses of actual problems. His paintings began reflecting his conscience on anything from politics to sadness, and he frequently claimed that his conscience sprang from his discussions with Lola. As a historian and activist in her own way, Lola held firm convictions about accountability, honesty, and using one's position to change the world. Redford picked up such beliefs. He has acknowledged in interviews that she helped him become more reflective about the roles he took on and the messages they conveyed. It had nothing to do with fame. It had to do with purpose. He said, "She kept me aligned." Fake was not tolerated by her. Her influence never left him, even as their marriage started to falter. Redford developed into a missionary storyteller, someone who challenged in addition to entertaining. And it all began with the woman who, long before Hollywood ever phoned, had faith in the power of a good narrative. She was the first to tell me that I had a voice. I also paid attention. However, even profound respect and a same set of values weren't always enough to stop the waves of change. The silently developed fissures widened after almost 30 years together. Finally, they had to make the hardest choice of all. Life had drawn them too far apart, not because the love was no longer there. When the spotlight becomes too much for love to handle, Robert and Lola decided to get a divorce in 1985. After 27 years of marriage, there was only a discreet mutual decision to split ways, no scandal or dramatic headlines. They had endured the rigors of family life, loss, and celebrity. Ultimately, though, the stress of leading disparate lives under one name was too much. According to Redford, it wasn't anger, it was fact. In their marriage, fame had turned into a third party. Redford never stopped moving. red carpets, interviews, and movie sets. Lola, who had always cherished her privacy, became further estranged from their previous existence. It was impossible to overlook the growing emotional gap between them. Redford once thought, "I was becoming a stranger in my own home." Despite this, their mutual respect remained intact after their marriage ended. There were no scathing public declarations or candid interviews. Rather, there was honor. They continued to be involved in one another's lives, concentrating on raising their kids with love and honoring their history. Robert resumed his work, and Lola persisted in her activities. However, something had changed. Something that could not be replaced was gone. When her name was mentioned in interviews years later, Redford still spoke softly. "Memories, no resentment. She was a part of the beat of my life. That doesn't go away," he said. Despite the dissolution of their marriage, their bond persisted. Maybe the love did too. "We continued to love one another. We simply lost the ability to travel the same route." The friendship persisted even after the marriage ended. Their lives progressed along with time. However, the unseen bond between them remained unbroken. And that modest bond would develop into something much more potent in the years that followed. Respect for one another, a common past, and a type of love that endures beyond divorce. An enduring relationship, a polite distance. Robert and Lola remained in each other's lives after the divorce. They just took a step back. Their attention shifted to raising their kids, finding healing, and creating independent lives that nonetheless occasionally touched. Their breakup never turned ugly, unlike many Hollywood splits. They never did that. Redford asserted that we had a history, and that history is worthy of respect. They maintained communication, provided remote support, and purposefully continued to co-parent. Even after receiving her PhD, Lola continued to be a powerful voice in environmental education and action. Robert, on the other hand, concentrated on using Sundance to preserve and direct independent film. Although they each achieved success in their own ways, their intense admiration for one another remained constant. Redford was careful about what he said whenever he was asked about love. Instead than talking about regret, he talked about timing and how his work, thoughts, and memories were still influenced by the life they had together. "There's a part of me that always stayed with her quietly," he said in a rare comment. Redford never remarried her, but he also never erased her. And maybe that's what makes their story so unique. And that quiet part, still loyal, still tender, followed him into his later years. They were no longer a couple, but they were still a story, one that was written in chapters of growth, loss, purpose, and reflection. Transition, 60 words. Two people who couldn't stay together but never really let go. Some love doesn't end, it just changes form. And as time went on and the spotlight waned a bit, Robert Redford found himself going back to Lola's memory rather than her doorstep. Her name kept coming up in silent interviews and introspective moments, and gradually the world started to realize. After their divorce, Lola Van Wagen didn't fade into the shadow of her ex-husband's fame. Instead, she stepped into her own spotlight, but it wasn't the Hollywood kind, rather. It was a quiet light driven by purpose. Lola became a dedicated environmental activist and historian, earning a PhD, and founding organizations centered on sustainability and education. He never really stopped loving her more than Robert's ex-wife. While Redford controlled the screens, Lola shaped the world behind them. Lola was not only passionate, but relentless, staying true to her core values, from producing documentaries on women's history and climate change to launching educational initiatives. And when she did give interviews, she always focused on the cause and never on the past. Her work reflected the very qualities that once attracted Robert: strength, grace, and a strong sense of responsibility. She became a role model for their children, and a respected figure in the academic and environmental communities. Although she rarely mentioned Robert, her actions spoke volumes about the kind of person she was: dignified, private, and always striving for something greater than herself. Redford once said she never needed the spotlight, just results. While Redford continued to age gracefully on screen, Lola made her mark in the real world, demonstrating that although love may not have lasted, her influence on Robert and the world did. Over the years, many have questioned whether Lola ever remarried, but she never did. Perhaps this was because Lola remained committed to her life's work, whether by choice or chance. She didn't seek legacy. Instead, she created a single transition. 60 words. However, while Lola was subtly changing lives through her activism, Robert was starting a new stage in his life. As he looked back, thought came with age, and with thought came truth. In the quiet of his later years, one name kept coming up, not that of a director or co-star, but a woman he had once called home. From The Sting to All the President's Men to founding the Sundance Film Festival, Robert Redford's career was nothing short of legendary. He had it all: awards, critical acclaim, political influence, and a career that soared, but his heart remained motionless. Although he dated other women and had meaningful relationships in later life, friends frequently remarked that there was something about Robert that remained emotionally reserved. Despite all of this, there was a part of him that remained unaffected by fame. A quiet ache. A memory that fame couldn't replace. "There are some people you never stop carrying with you," he once said in an interview, eyes distant. While others praised his ability to age gracefully, Robert frequently avoided speaking deeply about personal love. He threw himself into meaningful projects, directed films with heart, and became a protector of independent voices. They felt that a part of his heart had long been spoken for, and he never publicly disputed that. It's not that he didn't love again, but rather that he never seemed to love again like that. The kind of love that started before the fame, before the pressure, before the masks. However, whenever he was asked about his past in interviews, there was always a silence, a pause, before he answered, as if some feelings were too delicate to express. Time did what it always does, softening the ego, calming the noise, and creating room for truth. At 88, Robert Redford no longer needed to defend his image. Lola had met him when he was still raw, still real, and it was that rare kind of connection that fame could never replicate. She loved the version of me no one else ever got to see. When Redford reached his late 80s, the world had changed, but his memories had not. In a rare moment of vulnerability during an interview, he was asked if he had any regrets. Instead, he gave the world something more valuable: a confession that had been quietly living inside him for decades. He answered slowly, thoughtfully, and then, without being asked, he said her name: Lola. It wasn't a prepared, dramatic, or phony response. It was honest, and he talked softly about her. Their early years, their dreams, and their losses together. He didn't try to change the past or act as though it were flawless, but he made it clear that she was the love of my life. Redford thought about what he missed most, not the big things, but the little ones: the long walks, the quiet nights, the way she challenged him, called him out, and held him steady. He didn't flinch when he said it. It was a statement, not a maybe, a truth finally spoken aloud. He acknowledged that he didn't fully appreciate it at the time. It wasn't an apology, it wasn't a plea, it was peace. When asked why he chose to talk about her now after all these years, he simply replied, "Because time runs out, and some things deserve to be said before it does." That fame got loud, and he didn't always listen, but now that the noise was gone, her voice was the clearest. It became evident from those words that Robert Redford had not only remembered a lost love, but had honored it. As he turned the last pages of his amazing life, the one name that reverberated above all the roles, accolades, and applause was hers. A final tribute to the woman who helped shape his life, his values, and his story. Some people never leave your story, even if they're not in your chapters anymore. "She was the love of my life," Robert Redford said. She was the love of my life. He didn't just speak for Lola Van Wagen, he spoke for everyone who has ever carried a love that shaped them, even if it didn't last forever. At the age of 88, with nothing left to prove, he gave the world the most human thing he could ever give: his heart. It served as a reminder that some relationships are enduring and change with time, that love is measured by depth rather than eternity, and that Lola had stayed a constant in his heart over the years, not in pictures or interviews, but in the quiet spots and in between moments when true emotions exist. As a man looking back and saying what needed to be said, Robert Redford has played presidents, poets, rebels, and cowboys, but this confession may be his most honest role to date. "I never stopped carrying her," he said, "not for a day." Their love didn't end in a fairy tale, rather it ended in reality, with human flaws and divergent paths, but it left behind something timeless. Redford reminded us all that even the most famous lives are based not only on success, but also on love that endures even when it fades. She was it, always was. Respect, memory, and the kind of intense affection that only grows stronger with age. If this story touched you, please share who your unforgettable love was in the comments. If you want to see more powerful stories like this one, please like, subscribe, and tap the bell. Robert Redford's rise, his heartbreak, and the one woman who remained in his memory even after the marriage ended. At 88, he didn't talk about movies or awards. Instead, He talked about her because, at the end of the day, some love stories never leave us. We appreciate you viewing and sharing this time with us.